What happens when a seemingly invincible army crumbles overnight? As the Ukrainian soldiers proudly hoisted their blue and yellow flag above the Kupansk Vlovi train station, a powerful fortress of the Russian defense, chaos erupted within the ranks of Russian generals and the Kremlin. The toll from 6 long months of futile offensive attempts was staggering. Thousands of armored vehicles lay in ruins, and tens of thousands of soldiers vanished, yet their lines barely budged. More devastating was the dawning realization: Russia was losing, struggling to defend its positions. In a desperate response, Putin amassed a colossal force along the critical Kupansk-Kharkiv line. He planned for an extended war of attrition, hinging all hopes on the brutal Russian winter, perceived as a strategic ally. However, Ukraine had crafted a lengthy and calculated counter-strategy, capitalizing on burgeoning issues in the Kharkiv-Belgorod Triangle. September 2025 marked a pivotal moment. Ukraine unleashed a major offensive. As Russian commanders plotted their next moves in northeastern Ukraine, Ukrainian forces executed perfectly timed surprise attacks, significantly dismantling Putin's troops, especially those with the Kiev flank. On September 23, 2025, a thunderous blow echoed through military corridors. Putin's aggressive summer campaign suffered a crushing defeat. The city of Kupansk, the pivotal point split by the Ossel River, witnessed the end of relentless bloodshed and stalemate, signaling a dramatic shift in momentum. Victory belonged to the Ukrainian forces. With fierce valor, they regained complete control of Kupansk, driving their Russian foes back over a kilometer from the city's center. This marked more than mere territorial reclamation. It was a defining moment that sent shockwaves to the world, illustrating who would command the future of this war after the unraveling of Putin's aspirations. Beyond Kupansk, the implications of this victory were dire for the Russian army, facing catastrophic challenges on the southern front near Donetsk. While the Russian defenses faltered in Kupansk, Ukrainian forces orchestrated another brilliant operation, trapping over 1,500 Russian soldiers in a deadly cauldron. This dual-action offensive highlighted a new reality: Ukraine was no longer merely on the defensive. They were the architects of battle, now dictating the terms of engagement. How did Ukraine orchestrate this unprecedented triumph at Kupansk? As we delve into this tale of resilience and strategy, we unveil the significance of Kupansk as a critical asset in the ongoing conflict. For months, the Russian command stockpiled thousands of troops and a vast arsenal to seize the city, aiming to launch further assaults into the heart of Ukraine. Yet, this plan evaporated under the steadfast and strategic defense devised by Ukrainian generals. The tide dramatically turned with the deployment of the Ukrainian 10th Corps, a formidable reserve equipped with cutting-edge Leopard 2 tanks, Bradley infantry carriers, and advanced artillery provided by Western allies. This force showcased overwhelming technological and tactical advantages over their beleaguered Russian adversaries. The Ukrainian units not only thwarted the Russian advances but executed breathtaking counter-offensive operations that dislodged enemy forces from their stronghold, liberating substantial territory around Kupansk. Amidst the wreckage of a once formidable offensive, Russian resources were exposed as outdated relics, far beneath the modern capabilities of Ukraine's forces. The scene within Kupansk depicted a disastrous fallout for the Russian military, a disorganized retreat from their earlier dreams of domination. But what would unfold next in this fierce theater of war? As the dust settled over Kupansk, Ukrainian leadership prepared to leverage their newfound advantage. This battle opened a door for elite units like the 225th Separate Assault Regiment and the 71st Jaeger Brigade, launching relentless operations deep into Russian-held territory. No longer merely defending their land, they were advancing, forcing Russian troops into an ever-narrowing noose. Meanwhile, in the southern regions, a carefully orchestrated Ukrainian offensive captured the vulnerable Russian forces positioned in a precarious protrusion, liberating multiple settlements in a matter of weeks. The closure of this encirclement began an unrelenting siege that encapsulated the essence of the Ukrainian strategy, transforming a defensive war into a potent offensive campaign. Just when things seemed balanced on the edge of chaos, the revelations of this operation emerged. With over 1,500 soldiers now surrounded, limits on their choices began to pile up. Surrender, starvation, or desperate assaults into the unknown were their only paths forward. These dire situations revealed more than military losses. They struck at the very psyche of a beleaguered army, capturing the fear and disillusionment of those stranded. Under mounting pressure, the once glorious Russian military presence began to falter. The fallout from Kupansk and the unfolding events in the surrounding areas revealed a systematic collapse. The grim truth emerged: Russia's manpower was depleting. Over 1 million lives lost had created an irreparable void. Desperate personnel replacements sent to the front were poorly trained, often unmotivated, hastily mobilized individuals unable to mount a credible defense against the determined Ukrainian forces. Compounding these challenges, a logistical collapse made it increasingly impossible for Russian units to maintain any semblance of operational capacity. The relentless targeting of their supply routes deprived them of access to necessary equipment. As Ukraine began exploiting these vulnerabilities, a shift in the war narrative became undeniable. With the ground shifting underfoot, the question now looms: can the Russian forces adapt, or will they continue their descent into chaos? The answers may lie in the heart of the tumult in Kupansk and Donetsk, where the very rules of warfare are being rewritten. Will Putin's dreams of victory hold, or will history paint a different picture as the struggle wears on? In the heat of battle, Ukrainian forces emerged as resilient defenders, turning the tide against worn-out Russian units reminiscent of a bygone era. Their relentless counteroffensive not only repelled numerous assaults but also reclaimed the city center and the crucial eastern flank. With strategic precision, Ukraine liberated vast areas around Kupansk, restoring the vital P07 to P79 road network as a lifeline for urban logistics. As Ukrainian commanders assessed the battlefield, the mixed equipment on both sides illustrated the prolonged struggle. On the Russian front, outdated vehicles like the T-7290 family and BMP-23 infantry fighting vehicles were hastily deployed, their presence starkly underscoring the unraveling strength of Putin's forces. This robust display of Ukrainian strategy shattered the once feared Russian advance toward Kupansk, marking a turning point that would shape the war's trajectory. The liberation of Kupansk held far-reaching implications, crippling Russia's capacity to launch an assault from the Belgorod region, an essential step for safeguarding Ukraine's vibrant second city. Following their stunning victory, elite units like the 225th Separate Assault Regiment and the 71st Jagger Brigade surged northeast towards the Sumy region. President Zelensky confirmed their pursuit of Russian troops, signaling a dramatic shift from purely defensive postures to an aggressive push back into enemy territory. However, while triumphant echoes of the north resonated, an ominous storm brewed in the south, particularly in the Donetsk direction. Putin's summer offensive, which had already cost over 210,000 soldiers, faced an impending collapse. Ukrainian forces, adept at orchestrating traps, turned the tide against the beleaguered Russian columns, enticing them into elaborate ambushes that would seal their fate. But what happens next in this escalating confrontation? Can Ukraine maintain this momentum and outmaneuver their adversaries? As the battle rages on, the smell of gunpowder and the sounds of distant artillery echo in the air, each moment charged with uncertainty and life-altering consequences. The unfolding drama raises a chilling question: will the escalating clashes in Donetsk spell disaster for the remnants of the Russian army? As the encircled soldiers within the Donetsk cauldron brace for impending doom, the gravity of their plight weighs heavily. They remain trapped by their own failures, eagerly awaiting an outcome that could alter the landscape of military power for years to come. The cycle of defeat looms ominously, leaving us to ponder: how does a once mighty force disintegrate under the weight of its own ambition? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, cloaked in the chaos of war. When Putin's summer offensive collapsed, it marked a catastrophic defeat for the Russian army. Over 210,000 lives were lost in a futile attempt to gain ground. However, Ukraine did not simply defend, they baited the weary Russian forces into a meticulously crafted trap. What unfolded next was a relentless counteroffensive, a spectacle of strategic brilliance that would leave echoes on the battlefield. With a clever strategy known as the Three Cauldrons, Ukrainian forces targeted the Russian advance in the Dorylyapokha region, liberating 8 critical settlements in a matter of weeks. The names are etched in history now: Ruska, Rubishna, Novovodian, Petrivka, Baikal, Zolotic, Kolodiaz, Volodymyrivka, and Pankivka. Each village reclaimed wasn't just a strategic victory but a step in narrowing the noose around a floundering Russian contingent. In a dramatic escalation, Ukrainian command reported that 168.8 square kilometers were liberated as part of the counteroffensive, with another 187.7 square kilometers cleared of Russian sabotage teams. As fate would have it, more than 1,500 Russian soldiers found themselves completely encircled in a punishing pocket. As the true identity of these forces began to surface, it revealed a dire picture: remnants of the 1,442nd Motorized Infantry Regiment, struggling with grave shortages of equipment, ammunition, and food, victims of the very chaos that engulfed them. Amid all this turmoil, the famed Azov Regiment played a definitive role in sealing the encirclement. In seamless coordination with Ukrainian forces, they captured Pankovka and the commanding hills nearby, effectively locking the door on the Russian forces' last escape route. Inside the trap, desperation ruled. The options dwindled to surrender, starvation, or a frantic, futile last stand. This encirclement was not merely a tactical feat, it struck a heavy psychological blow to the morale of the Russian army. Captured soldiers over the past months, with numbers exceeding 69, revealed a grim narrative through interrogation videos. They were young, frightened individuals, severed from their leaders, left to languish without proper provisions, and utterly forsaken. The devastation witnessed in Kupansk resonated deeply throughout the ranks, and the colossal siege in Dorilia wasn't an isolated mishap, it was a harbinger of the substantial and systemic collapse of the Russian military structure. So, what led to this unraveling? The core issue stems from a severe manpower crisis. Russia's loss of over 1 million soldiers has created an irreplaceable chasm. New soldiers are often poorly trained draftees, lacking the conviction and resilience of the seasoned and highly motivated Ukrainian defenders. The equipment and logistics situation presents a second layer of failure. Russia's modern military assets have been severely depleted, and they find themselves forced to dispatch outdated artillery and vehicles into battle. These relics stand no chance against Ukraine's modern Western systems, further exacerbated by Ukraine's successful targeting of Russian supply lines. Moreover, the command structure within the Russian military is rigid and slow. It crumbles under the dynamic nature of modern warfare. A sharply contrasting element to Ukraine's agile response strategies. As the tides of war shift, the implications of these failures will be felt far and wide. The Russian military is not merely facing a loss on this battlefield, the ghost of its operational collapse haunts the Kremlin. Can they recover? Will they adapt in time, or is this the beginning of the end for their military ambitions? The answers lie in the unfolding chapters of this ongoing saga. As the fighters from Ukraine closed in on Pankovka and captured the surrounding critical hills, they effectively sealed off a precarious situation for more than 1,500 Russian soldiers trapped in a tightening grip. The options for these soldiers dwindled rapidly. They faced an unbearable choice: surrender, succumb to starvation, or attempt a desperate, suicidal assault. This siege echoed beyond mere tactics, it represented a profound psychological blow. With months of relentless combat behind them, over 69 Russian soldiers had been captured within the Dorilia region. Footage from these interrogations starkly revealed the disintegration of morale among the Russian ranks. Young men, terrified and isolated from their commanders, had remained without provisions for weeks. They found themselves stranded, waiting for the end without a clear path forward. The recent defeats in Kupansk and the encirclement at Dorilia are more than isolated tragedies. They signify the unmistakable unraveling of the Russian military structure. What has led to this precarious state? The foremost issue is a crippling manpower crisis. Over 1 million lives have been lost in this conflict, leaving an unfillable gap. The Kremlin's inability to recruit willing volunteers has forced them to deploy inadequately trained, unmotivated soldiers, many under coercion or tricked into service, at the front. This army, weak and disoriented, struggles against the resolute, battle-hardened forces of Ukraine, who fight valiantly for their homeland. But it doesn't end there. The nightmare of outdated equipment and logistical failures looms large. Russia has seen the majority of its modern tanks and artillery systems decimated in the initial year of conflict. Now, they are left to rely on antiquated Soviet-era machinery too old to compete with Ukraine's contemporary Western armaments. Moreover, Ukraine's long-range missiles strike fear into Russian logistics. They continually disrupt supply lines, ensuring that even the old gear fails to reach the front. And then there's the command structure, a rigidly centralized system that has proven ineffective against the nimbleness required in modern warfare. Time and again, this outdated method falters, unable to adapt to the fast-evolving nature of combat. In summation, the Ukrainian military's embrace of a flexible, innovative warfare doctrine starkly contrasts with Russia's outmoded tactics. The victories in Kupansk and Doriliya are much more than simple territorial gains. They are pivotal moments that strike at the heart of a crumbling military strategy. What will become of those trapped soldiers? Will they find the resolve to fight against their inevitable fate, or will despair consume them first? As this high-stakes game unfolds, the battlefield continues to reveal its truths. As the Ukrainian soldiers triumphantly raised their blue and yellow flag at the Kupansk Vlovi train station, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of fear and disbelief among Russian officials. They were confronted with the grim statistics compiled over 6 months of relentless fighting, crippling losses in armored vehicles and lives, yet no territorial gains to show for the sacrifices made. The Kremlin's grip on the situation was slipping, leading President Putin to assemble a massive strike force along the Kupansk-Kharkiv line, his hopes pinned on the winter, a season he believed would favor his troops. Unfortunately for Russia, Ukraine's long-term strategy was far more cunning. In September 2025, while Putin's forces were distracted by plans for an offensive, Ukraine launched a series of surprise attacks that would shatter Russian morale. This was the concluding act of a gruesome play that lasted several months of stalemate. The Ukrainian forces executed a brilliant maneuver on September 23, effectively dismantling the Russian summer offensive and reclaiming Kupansk, a city rich in strategic value. The triumph was more than merely reclaiming land, it was a critical blow to Russian ambitions. With control of Kupansk regained, the Ukrainian army pushed the Russian invaders back, asserting dominance not just over a few square kilometers but signaling to the world that Kyiv was now holding the initiative. This defeat was not only a setback in the north, it foreshadowed greater calamities for Russian forces in the south. As Ukraine's forces strengthened their hold, yet another brutal confrontation brewed in the Donetsk region. While Russia faced the aftermath of its failed campaigns, Ukrainian soldiers ensnared over 1,500 Russian troops in a tactical trap of their own, proving that Ukraine was no longer merely defending but seizing the offensive with newfound prowess. What steps led to the landmark victory in Kupansk? Why were the overextended Russian troops so vulnerable to encirclement in the Donetsk cauldron? As clues to these questions unearthed themselves, it became evident that the battlefield had transformed, not only in territory but in the resolve of the fighters. Kupansk, essential for its railway connections, symbolized more than logistic advantage, it was pivotal for both sides. As the relentless campaign continued, Russian forces, bogged down by outdated tactics, faced an uphill battle against an agile and responsive Ukrainian military. Recent months saw the Ukrainian 10th Corps deployed at a critical juncture, equipped with advanced Western technology that rendered the aging Soviet-era equipment of the Russian forces almost obsolete. Ukrainian victories, showcasing swift counteroffensives, liberated swathes of land and bolstered urban supply chains. What had been a dire stalemate turned into a series of successful breakthroughs, leading to the reclamation of territory long held by invaders. This surge did not merely restore lost areas, it set the stage for a broader Ukrainian strategy to shift the conflict toward Russian borders. Tensions simmered beneath the surface in both military and political spheres as victories sparked a ruthless competition among Russia's elite to avoid blame for a floundering war effort. In a system where accountability is tantamount to treachery, the Kremlin was abuzz with speculation and paranoia. Driven by desperation, Russia's military command was left scrambling, as fresh reports of surrendering troops and captured materials surfaced. Each day, the confidence of the Russian ranks waned as the omnipresent shadow of doom loomed over them, an illustration of the systemic collapse that had gripped their forces. The relentless rumblings of defeat echoed within the Kremlin, where an internal struggle to scapegoat the failure brewed. Russia's generals, long considered untouchable, found themselves ensnared in a web of betrayal, while the myth of an invincible army crumbled under the weight of their failed campaigns. What does the future hold for a regime that thrives on the illusion of military might yet finds itself on the edge of ruin? With a beleaguered army and a faltering command, one thing is certain: the battle for Russia's legacy is far from over. Behind the closed doors of power, the countdown to accountability has begun, and the consequences of failure will inevitably reverberate through the heart of the Kremlin. The ultimate question remains: who will pay the price for the downfall? In the aftermath of a significant military setback, a fierce power struggle ignited within the Kremlin, marking a critical juncture in Russia's leadership dynamics. On one front stood the aging hierarchy of the military, folks who had been the face of the Kremlin since the inception of the conflict. On the other emerged a more ruthless faction, a group of hawkish officials and ambitious generals from security agencies like the FSB, who were salivating at the opportunity to usurp power amid the chaos. Social media platforms, under the thumb of this hawk-driven wave, unleashed a scathing assault on the Russian Ministry of Defense and its leaders. They accused these old guard figures of corruption and treachery, claiming they had sabotaged the nation's military strength from the inside. Their rhetoric was laden with danger, an insidious blend of criticism and calls for a coup. What was at stake was more than just tactics; it was a battle for the very soul of Russian power. Vladimir Putin now found himself entangled in a perilous dilemma. To remove the top commanders would be to admit colossal failures while war raged on, inviting chaos within the ranks and revealing the fragility of his own leadership. Yet if he opted to retain their positions, he risked inciting rebellion among the hawks, a crucial support base in his quest for dominance. Anticipating Putin's strategy, many believed he would resort to classic KGB approaches, employing a blend of fear and calculated purges. Speculation buzzed that lower and mid-level generals on the Kupansk and Donetsk fronts might soon vanish, arrested on corruption or betrayal charges. Such actions would signal to the world that a brutal reckoning was unfolding behind the Kremlin's closed doors, determining the fate of an empire teetering on the edge of collapse. What profound moves would Putin orchestrate to maintain his grip on power? Would the hunted turn against the hunter, or would the silence of the Kremlin herald a deeper, darker conspiracy? As these questions hung in the air, one thing became clear: the consequences of this internal conflict would reverberate far beyond the walls of the Kremlin, reshaping the very fabric of Russia's war efforts. In the weeks that followed the decisive battles of Kupansk and Donetsk, whispers of turmoil emerged from the front lines. Commanders found themselves arrested, one by one, as allegations of corruption and treason began to surface amidst the chaos. Each quiet disappearance sent shockwaves through the Kremlin, signaling that a long-awaited reckoning may have begun. But how could a regime, which had woven a complex tapestry of lies for 25 years about Western plots and unassailable leadership, explain the catastrophic loss of Kupansk? The answer lies in a desperate distortion of reality. State media painted a picture of glory, claiming that the losses were not retreats but tactical withdrawals, aimed at regrouping for a stronger defense. The narrative crafted by propaganda suggested heroism in losing ground while depicting the brutal siege in Donetsk as a strategic victory, with Russian forces allegedly luring the enemy into a deadly trap. As public trust in these narratives began to crack, the truth seeped through the cracks. The vast network of social media became the lifeline for many soldiers. They courageously chronicled their dire circumstances, revealing the lack of supplies and morale under stifling conditions. Messages slipped through the cracks of the state's image, documenting the desperation: soldiers sent to battle with minimal ammunition or insufficient provisions while their commanders abandoned them. The reality that unfolded was starkly different from the glorified tales fed to the public. The grim arrivals of zinc coffins in towns throughout Russia told a haunting story of loss. Each coffin represented a life extinguished, further corroding the edifice of official propaganda. With these chilling images, the walls of deception began to tremble, as families received not news of victory, but the terrible cost of war laid bare before them. As the cameras rolled and state-approved narratives flowed, the gap between reality and fiction widened alarmingly. The disparity was not just a minor bump, it was a chasm that threatened to erode the regime's grip on a population bred on disillusionment. The growing divide forged an uncertain future, as an increasing number of voices from the front spoke out, jeopardizing the fragile framework that upheld power and propaganda. Would these courageous revelations spark the change long imagined but never realized? Would the truth finally dismantle the narrative that had shielded the regime for so long? The thunder of impending change could be heard, approaching with each truth told. As whispers of disorder began to echo through the ranks, Russian soldiers faced the harsh reality of their dire situation. Abandoned by their commanders, many were left to fend for themselves in the unforgiving landscape of war. The imagery of zinc coffins returning home became a haunting symbol, a stark contrast to the idealized narrative spun by state media. This disconnect between the polished facade presented to citizens and their grim day-to-day existence widened relentlessly. What once was solidified control over the populace began to fracture. The deepening military crisis evolved into a full-scale political upheaval, directly threatening the regime's stability. In the shadows of the Kremlin, a fierce clash ensued. Generals, once dignified leaders, turned into desperate players in a dangerous game of survival, undermining one another to hold their positions. Amidst this turmoil, the Ukrainian army pushed forward, capitalizing on the chaos and indecision that plagued the Russian command structure. Putin had envisioned a powerful Russia, poised and united on the global stage. Instead, he found himself presiding over a fractured regime, riddled with paranoia and strife. Generals faced off against one another, and the lies of propaganda began to unravel. With every setback on the battlefield, cracks appeared in the Kremlin's impenetrable image. Now, the pressing question loomed: how long before the weight of this defeat crumbled the regime from within? As the Russian resistance faltered, so too did the foundations of power that had kept Putin at the helm for so long. Unfolding events signaled a chilling reckoning. Russian soldiers trapped in a turbulent cauldron faced the inevitable collapse of their strength and resolve. As the war escalated, the dilemma grew more complex: would the disillusioned masses rise against their leader, or would they remain shackled to the illusion crafted by years of deception? In the end, the fate of an empire teetered on the brink, as the clashing ambitions of generals, bureaucrats, and soldiers wrote a new chapter of uncertainty in the story of power and its disintegration. In the midst of a fierce battle, the tides of war dramatically shifted when Ukrainian forces regained control of Kupansk, pushing Russian invaders a full kilometer from the city's edge. This wasn't merely a territorial reclaiming, it marked a monumental strategic triumph that amplified Ukraine's standing in the conflict. After months of intense struggle, the banner of victory now flew high, signaling a shift in the war's momentum. The implications of this success rippled far beyond the city limits. While the Ukrainian forces triumphed in Kupansk, an even more devastating blow awaited the Russian army to the south, where over 1,500 of their soldiers found themselves ensnared in an inescapable trap. This dual-front strategy showcased how Ukraine evolved from a defensive force to an innovative military power that could orchestrate complex maneuvers, effectively rewriting the rules of engagement. How did Ukrainian forces orchestrate such a remarkable victory in Kupansk? And what awaited those trapped Russian soldiers in the cauldron of Donetsk? Kupansk was more than just a strategic city, it was a vital junction of transportation and a pivotal crossing over the Oso River. For months, Russia had poured resources into this region, amassing a considerable force of troops and armored vehicles, all aiming to seize the city and push south toward the vulnerable flanks of Ukrainian defenders in Donbass. Yet, their aggressive plans crumbled against the resilient and calculated defense mounted by Ukraine. The true turning point came with the arrival of the Ukrainian 10th Corps. A powerful reserve unit armed with advanced Leopard 2 tanks, Bradley armored vehicles, and modern artillery systems. This formidable force established a stark technological and tactical superiority over the battle-worn Russian units, remnants of a bygone era. Not only did they repel Russian offensives, but recent counteroffensives surprised and completely uprooted enemy positions from both the heart of Kupansk and its eastern flank. Numerous square kilometers of land around Kupansk were liberated, restoring crucial logistical routes that had been critical for urban supply chains. The region transformed once more into a reliable passage for supplies and reinforcements, positioning Ukraine favorably in the ongoing conflict. As the dust settled over the battlefield, the strategic implications of Kiev's success grew clearer. The liberation of Kupansk shattered Russia's ambitions to strike further into Ukraine from Belgorod, safeguarding the second-largest Ukrainian city. Following this victory, elite Ukrainian units advanced, seizing the initiative and moving towards Russia's borders with relentless vigor. What had begun as a defensive effort was evidently evolving into a counteroffensive strategy aimed at pushing the invading forces back onto their own territory. Yet, while Kupansk witnessed these monumental shifts, the south was not to be overlooked. In the depths of the Donetsk region, Ukrainian forces crafted their next significant strategic victory. With the summer offensive that Putin launched leading to the loss of over 210,000 soldiers, the Russian command found itself halted in its tracks. Kiev's troops skillfully lured exhausted Russian formations into a meticulously laid trap. The operation, known among military experts as the Three Cauldrons, led to the liberation of 8 towns: Ruska, Rubishna, Novovodian, Petrivka, Baikal, Zolotic, Kolodiaz, and Volodymyrivka. Each recapture wasn't just a gain of ground, but part of a larger strategy to encircle hundreds of Russian soldiers, who now faced dire consequences in isolation. Thus, with numbers piling up, Ukrainian President Zelensky confirmed that the Dorpilia counteroffensive alone liberated an impressive 168.8 square kilometers, while 187.7 kilometers were cleared of enemy sabotage units. A more formidable challenge lay ahead for over 1,500 encircled Russian soldiers, whose identity slowly emerged as weary regiments stripped of morale and resources. These soldiers, many conscripted or hastily mobilized, faced a grim reality. With crucial supplies dwindling and reinforced attempts thwarted by Ukrainian artillery, their options narrowed down to surrender or face the chilling scenario of a desperate final assault. The siege of Dorpilia proved not only to be a tactical victory for Ukrainian forces but also a massive psychological blow to the already crumbling morale of the Russian army. Interrogation footage revealed the state of despair among captured soldiers, youthful faces filled with fear and hopelessness, cut off from support and left to fend for themselves with dwindling supplies. Both the defeat at Kupansk and the siege of Dorpilia showcased the unraveling structure of the Russian army, a signal that the prolonged conflict had driven them into a corner. What fueled this rapid decline? Primarily, a severe manpower crisis emerged, leading to the deployment of inadequately trained and poorly motivated soldiers. In addition, the losses suffered through the early phases of the war left Russia relying on outdated hardware, unable to compete with Ukraine's sophisticated Western support. Command and control, rigid and slow, failed in the heat of dynamic warfare. As the world witnessed these seismic shifts upon the battlefield, it became undeniable: the narrative of this war was evolving. What future challenges awaited both sides as they navigated the complex theater of war, and what further implications would these victories carry? Each day would unfold new chapters in this unfolding saga of resilience and determination, drawing the eyes of the globe closer to the heart of Ukraine's fight. In a dramatic turn of events, Ukrainian forces reclaimed full control of Kupansk, pushing the Russian troops back a significant kilometer toward the city's outskirts. This wasn't merely a reclaiming of land, it was a powerful declaration marking a decisive moment in the ongoing conflict. The victory not only revitalized the morale of Ukrainian soldiers but signified a larger strategic triumph that would echo across battlefields far and wide. As celebrations erupted within the Ukrainian ranks, a much darker reality loomed for the Russian army. In a striking parallel, hundreds of kilometers south, Ukrainian troops had successfully ensnared over 1,500 Russian soldiers in a treacherous trap, a hellish cauldron of despair. This operation showcased Ukraine's evolution from a mere defender to a proactive adversary, reshaping the dynamics of modern warfare itself. How did the forces in Kupansk achieve such an extraordinary victory? And what would become of the encircled Russian soldiers in their moment of reckoning? This city, a strategic jewel since the war's outset, held immense significance. Its status as a critical railway junction and a vital crossing over the Ossel River had made Kupansk a focal point for both Ukrainian and Russian operations. For months, Russian forces bolstered their ranks, gathering tanks and soldiers, intent on seizing this crucial territory to launch further offensives into eastern Ukraine. But their ambitions crumbled against the tactical brilliance and resilience displayed by Ukraine's defensive maneuvers. The tide shifted dramatically when the Ukrainian command deployed the 10th Corps, a well-equipped and strategically critical reserve. Armed with Leopard 2 tanks and modern Bradley armored vehicles, these forces established overwhelming superiority over their disheartened Russian counterparts, who were left clinging to outdated Soviet-era equipment. In a stunning series of counteroffensive maneuvers, the Ukrainian troops not only repelled the Russian advances but completely expunged their presence from the city center and the eastern flank. The operations liberated expansive territory surrounding Kupansk, reigniting the vital logistics corridor for urban supply and movement. As the battlefield shifted under the relentless thunder of artillery and the chaotic cacophony of war, it became evident that a palpable change had occurred. Voices of defiance rang out, spirits surged high, and the once stagnant front lines began to shift. But the victory in Kupansk would not only affect the tactical landscape, it held the promise of reshaping the entire course of the conflict. In the face of impending defeat, the Russian troops to the south faced a grim reality. Their encirclement was not merely a tactical flaw, it was a devastating psychological blow that would haunt their ranks and redefine their fate. Would they surrender, succumb to starvation, or mount a futile final offensive? The choices were few, and the stakes could not be higher as the days of struggle continued within the oppressive heat of artillery and the suffocating tension of battle. As we delve deeper into the significance of this pivotal victory, we will uncover how such triumphs could lead to the potential collapse of entire Russian forces, revealing the deeper issues at play within their military structure. What lies ahead in this high-stakes game, and will Ukraine continue to seize the initiative or face unforeseen repercussions? The theater of war is ever-changing, and the next moves will be crucial.